now in terms of parenting itself, that there's a number of different areas that come together and that kind of work together to coordinate how we respond to baby, how motivated we are to care for baby, how we can make decisions around caring for baby, and so on.
Hey everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of Entering Motherhood, a podcast dedicated specifically to new moms going through this amazing journey in life. I'm your host, Sarah Bilger, a postpartum nutritional coach / mechanical engineer. And as always, I'm so excited to be here with you and share all of the information I've been lucky enough to obtain since becoming a mom. In this episode, we talk with Dr. Jodi Pawluski, who is a neuroscientist and therapist, about her research that focuses on how the brain changes in motherhood and perinatal mental illness. Hi, mamas. I am super excited this week because I am loading you up with a bunch of information here. And like I said, we are talking with Dr. Jodi Pawluski, and this conversation was just so exciting to create and also to go back and edit, because I was just finding so many other little nuggets and things that she was saying to be so informative. And, although others are doing similar research, it's important that we talk about the findings and continue to open up this conversation surrounding what's being discovered. This is what's going to move the needle forward. And this is one of the reasons that she created her podcast, Mommy Brain Revisited, and is doing the work that she does. This episode is particularly exciting because it's super aligned with the direction of where the Entering Motherhood podcast is going, and it highlights a fellow mom in STEM. Dr. Pawluski is a mom of two herself and started her journey in researching motherhood actually before she even became a mom. Her story is so encouraging, and this episode is full of so much knowledge surrounding the science behind what is going on inside the brain as we make the transition into motherhood. We talk about what parts of the brain seem to be most affected during this time, how our emotions, motivation, decision-making abilities can be altered, and what research is actually being done right now, and what research needs to be done if we hope to make great strides in the future on this topic. So pop in those headphones, turn up the volume, and let's get this episode started. Hello, and welcome to Entering Motherhood. I am really, really excited about this episode today. So I will not waste any time, and we will let you introduce yourself for our listeners and get this episode started.
Super. Well, I'm really excited to be here and to talk to you about all things entering motherhood. My name is Jodi Pawluski. I'm a neuroscientist and a therapist. I'm Canadian, but based in France. And my research, probably for the past 10 plus years now, or even longer, has really focused on how the brain changes with motherhood and perinatal mental illness. And I also, I love to talk about all these changes. And I think there's a number of us doing this research, but we don't talk about it enough for moms and parents to learn really what's going on in the brain. So that's what I'm here to do today.
Awesome. So you are a mom yourself. I believe you have 2 kids, right?
Yes, I do. Yep.
So how old are they? And can you kind of lead us through what your journey was like when you first entered motherhood?
Yeah, definitely. So my kids are 10 and 8.5. So a bit older, maybe. It's been a while. I've been a mom for a while now, let's say. So I have a daughter first, and then I had a son. So I had 2 under 2. I was one of those, which was for us both a challenge, but also really enjoyable time. So my journey entering into motherhood, I mean, where do I start? I guess I could say that, I've been doing research in this space for a really long time. And in fact, my interest in motherhood came about before becoming a mom. And so in some ways, I think as I took this journey into motherhood, my knowledge, perhaps, and my background kind of informed or helped me to make this transition a bit smoother. to some degree. And yeah, I don't know. I can tell you for hours about my experience, but maybe
Yeah.
you have something more specific you want to know.
So if you were already doing this research before you became a mom, like what really led you to go into that field and why were you so interested in motherhood?
Yeah. So, I mean, from a very young age, I grew up on a small farm. So, from a very young age, we had a lot of animals around, and springtime was a time of mom and babies. And I was really interested in this relationship. I remember asking my grandma once when I was quite young, probably about 5, how things worked. Like, how did the baby chick work? And so interested in how things worked, but then more so also really curious about this relationship with parenting. Like we had a chicken who had hatched out ducklings, and that was really interesting to see how they interacted because the ducks wanted to be in water. She didn't want them there, and just kind of how this parenting kind of piece worked. And as I went into university, I was really interested in hormones and the brain and behavior. And so this intersection between those three things, it really, for me, I was like, well, pregnancy and motherhood and parenting is such a time where you see all these things change, especially, well, then we knew for sure the changes in hormones, of course, and of course the parental behavior, and not as much as what we know now in the brain. So I became really curious about motherhood and the brain essentially. And so it was really before I had kids. I mean, I always wanted to have kids, but it wasn't, I had been doing research around this for years before I actually had kids.
Yeah. And then why the brain specifically? I feel
Why the
like,
brain?
yeah.
Why the brain? I think because I was just really interested in how the brain functions in general. I did a bachelor's in biopsychology at the University of British Columbia, so we had a lot of brain and behavior type courses and hormones. And I think I was just really curious on how the brain functions and how it mediates behavior and how it can be affected by changes in our hormones. And so for me, it's the organ, maybe that's perhaps the biggest mystery of all the organs in the body. And it does so many things. So I think that for me is part of why I'm interested in the brain in particular.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, obviously everybody knows what the brain is. Like we all have one, but I think it is something that's still such a mystery, especially for us that are not in that field of study or even familiar. Like we don't learn about the brain on a day-to-day basis. We're not doing things to think about that, but we're obviously using it every day. So can you kind of give us like a basic rundown of parts of the brain or like general knowledge of what parts are maybe more of a focus when dealing with motherhood?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because the brain itself, I like to think of it, it's really, really complex. And so, even as a neuroscientist, I study really one part of the brain specifically. But often, when I'm talking about the parental brain, I can talk about it more generally because the brain itself has a number of different areas that seem to work together to coordinate any of our behaviors. And so, when we're talking about parenting, one brain area that comes up quite a bit we talk about and do research on is the amygdala, for example. So this is quite a small brain area, but it's one I'm sure you've heard of. This one's talked about a lot because of its role in emotional regulation. It does other things as well, but it also, so this is one of the brain areas that's probably key for parenting. We also have another brain area, the hypothalamus, that's really, really important for all our kind of regulatory processes. It's affected by lots of hormones and it plays a role in parenting. But then you have a lot of different brain areas, those areas like the nucleus accumbens and the striatum that are important for motivation and reward. And then we have our prefrontal cortex and other areas in our brain that help us to make decisions. And I mean, no brain area works in isolation, and no brain area is really like the amygdala isn't just for emotion, it's also affected by decision making and plays a role in our motivation and what have you. So it's a complex kind of circuit in our brain that coordinates our behavior, and we know more about it now in terms of parenting itself, that there's a number of different areas that come together and that kind of work together to coordinate how we respond to baby, how motivated we are to care for baby, how we can make decisions around caring for baby, and so on.
I know I've listened to a few of your podcasts and I've always found it really interesting, in general, like all the research that is being done on this. But I think the general opinion I hear is like there's just not enough being done. Like, where would you like to see things go as far as research for motherhood?
Yeah, I mean, one area that I really, really think we need to do more research in is on perinatal mental illness or mental illnesses, because we know there's quite a few of them, and how our brain really changes with these illnesses, and how we can maybe, target approaches or preventative factors so that we can ensure brain health. And if you think that 1 in 5 women will struggle with a mental illness during pregnancy or the postpartum period, and really in the research we have, I mean, maybe now we have 30 something research studies on this that are specific to the brain in humans, and a few more in animal models. But I mean, this is it should be quite shocking. In fact, I find it quite shocking to think that we have really neglected this area of research. And perhaps this is for a few reasons. I mean, it could be because we assume that these mental illnesses are so similar at other times in life. A big one that comes up for me is maybe we just don't care so much about maternal health and women's health, which I think is part of the factor. But moving forward in this research space, I would really, really love to see more research on how the brain is changing with perinatal mental illnesses, because these are biological disorders. It's no one's fault. They happen, and they happen for a biological reason, as well as, of course, how our biology interacts with the environment. So that for me would be number one, more research in that area.
So, what are you finding? Like, what are some things that we can be doing to help with our brain health and to better prepare for mental mood disorders in the postpartum period or even while pregnant?
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, a couple things that come to mind is number one, I mean, we are seeing that there's some brain changes in these parental brain areas with postpartum depression, which is perhaps the most studied perinatal mental illness. And we're also seeing that some of these brain areas that are involved in these illnesses are similar to the brain areas involved in these illnesses at other times in life, but they're responding in a different way. So I think it's important to realize that there are these changes, but they seem to be a bit unique to the parental or the maternal brain. We don't have so much work in non-birthing parents or fathers, so I think we still have a lot to do in that area. But then in general, I mean, how can we improve our brain health? So when it comes to mental illness, I think this is a great question. And often, some things that I think of are some basics that are good for us at any times in our lives, but maybe are more challenging as we're new parents. So it's the acronym SELF, which I think was coined by Karen Kleiman, who's with postpartum stress. She's written a number of books about perinatal mental health. So SELF, as in S, is for sleep, E is for exercise or movement, L for laughter or enjoyment, and F for food or nutrition. So all those components are really important for our brain health at any times in life, anytime in life. But of course, during the postpartum in particular, and even during pregnancy, it can be difficult to have those components, to highlight those components or take care of them. And also, there's a lot of pressure around, well, oh, I should sleep more, I should eat better, I should. And in fact, the way I approach it is like, well, let's just look at those 4 components in your life. And is there one thing you could change even a little bit? So could you go to bed maybe 10 minutes earlier? Or can you make sure to, if you feel like you would love to get together with your girlfriends, make a time to do that. That's part of that laughter enjoyment. So just checking in on like, oh, I'm not feeling super great right now. So is there something that I can modify that I need, or is there something that I've been missing? So have I not had a fresh piece of fruit or vegetable in the past week? So maybe I could like buy something colorful tomorrow that's fresh. So I like to approach it that way, just as a kind of a way that we can change things a little bit that could be protective and healthy for our brain. But of course, eating fresh strawberries isn't going to keep you from being depressed postpartum. That's not really the answer. I'm talking about things on a more general daily basis we could tune in with, and remember that our brain needs to be fed good stuff, and it needs to have some sleep, and it needs to have a good time and a little bit of outdoor activity maybe. Those are all healthy components for our brain health. I mean, in terms of really struggling with mental illness, I think we have a number of different approaches that are available when we have severe anxiety or depression or other mental illnesses in the perinatal period. And I think those things related, medications can be super great and super helpful. Therapy, of course, can be super great and helpful. Even parenting classes, and these things can really help with some of the stress around parenting. There's a lot of different components depending on what you think would be helpful for you that you could explore. But also these depend on what are available to you, which is a whole other issue. So I don't know if that, answers your question a little bit, but
Yeah. And I feel like obviously if we're doing human studies, we can kind of um incorporate those kinds of things, like actually like social interaction and like hanging out with our friends or doing things that like we actually enjoy. But when it comes to animal testing, like how are we able to relate that? Like I mean like we can't ask an animal like what do you enjoy? Okay, like let's do more of that, like, and then like also like to that, like what animals are we using to test, and why are
yeah.
they good correlating subjects, I guess.
Yeah, so I should mention, there's been 40 years of research on the maternal brain, specifically predominantly in animal models, because of course, when we use animal models, we can take out the brain, we can look at it more invasively. Whereas when we're working with humans, we usually are dependent on imaging, which gives us some pictures. So we can look at changes in, say, structure or volume, or changes in blood flow as an indication of activity. But to really deep dive, we often need to work with the tissue, and we can investigate, a number of different factors that could be playing a role: hormones, neurotransmitters, receptors, different cell types, what have you. So that's the first thing. So there's really been 40 years of research on this maternal behavior, specifically motivation to care for young in animal models. The most common ones are probably rodents, so rat, a laboratory rat, and mouse. So these, when you ask, you're like, well, obviously a rat isn't a human. Definitely not. But we know that our brain is very similar, has similar brain areas that do similar things in in a number of mammalian species. There's a conservation of the brain, and so we know the amygdala is important for certain behaviors related to fear, for example, in rodents, which we can measure, but also in humans. So same brain areas ideally do relatively similar things. Let's say that's the idea in rodents and humans, with, of course, humans being a bit more complex because of our environments. We also think differently, we can speak, we can make decisions in a different way, and what have you. So similarities and differences, of course, exist when we do translational research. When it comes to mental illness, of course, animal models can give us an indication of what could be happening in a human. So, for example, we can't ask them how they're feeling, but we can test for certain things like anxiety like behavior, or anhedonia, so not finding pleasure in things. So that's important to note, that we can look at aspects of, say, depression or anxiety. But of course, we don't know exactly how they're feeling. So, doing this type of research, you have to take that into account. But it does give an idea of like, oh, what could be going on in a person. But then when we're talking about things like nutrition or social interaction, for example, in a rat, in fact, they're very social. So they do like to have their little friends with them, right? So there's, in fact, some research showing that if they lived in a cage, if female mice live in a cage for 3 weeks alone, they show depressive type like behaviors. And so there are ways we can manipulate the environment of the animals we study to make it similar to interventions or stressors that humans will experience. But of course, it's not going to be the same. But there are lots of different ways we can get at pieces of the puzzle essentially with our animal models.
And you were saying earlier that, there's just not as much interest in this field or like as much funding and stuff. What would, in your opinion, kind of cause more people to be more willing to fund research projects like this? Or like what would be a driving factor to really up the need for this?
Yeah, I think, when it comes to maternal health in general, I think, well, okay, we can start with women's health in general. That's been a bit neglected. We can see there's a movement now to care for it. Maternal health is often surrounding the focus of the child and the infant, and lots of money goes towards research in this area, which is, of course, very valuable to ensure the baby survives and how can we help baby. But I think we have to start to really value the role that parents play in, especially mothers who often are the primary caregivers, that the role that they play in this developmental process and how significant it is for them, and spending more time not only in research looking at moms and having supporting a healthy transition to motherhood, but also implementing programs that we know already work that can support moms and new parents. I mean, there's lots we know from the research, but I don't think there's enough money going towards those types of supports for moms, depending on probably which country you live in. There's differences. But, I think we have to start valuing the role that caregivers have in general in society. I mean, we even see, teachers probably aren't paid enough. People who care for, people with all sorts of abilities probably could use more support and acknowledgement of what they do. Definitely parents and, mothers, we have to value this as really, it's a challenging job. It's a really important one. And if we're not actually taking care about what's happening with mom, then I think we're really, really failing in improving not only her health and well-being, but also the babies.
Yeah. Is there any, like, if this is something that we're interested in learning more about, is there any journals or literature that is specifically focused on research in parenthood?
Yeah, so there's a few different ones. I don't know all of them, but one that I am on the editorial board for is Archives of Women's Mental Health Research. So it has a lot of research about women's mental health in general, but a lot of perinatal mental health. There's also a new one that I'm involved in, and that's with Frontiers in the journals. There's a number of different ones, but it's Frontiers in Global Women's Health, and then there's a perinatal or a mental health component to that as well. So that one's free access, so you can access all their articles, which is quite good. And then there's other journals around women's health. I think there's Journal of Women's Health. And then, yeah, there must be some other ones, especially more specific to child development. There is child development, for example, and pediatrics, but those are more specific to child development than women's health. So, yeah, for me, Archives of Women's Mental Health is a great one to go to. And then Frontiers in Global Women's Health is another good one as well.
Where are you seeing, I guess, changes in the brain occurring along a timeline of someone becoming a parent?
Yeah, this is a good question, and it's been reviewed in a couple of recent reviews, and there's one in a special issue we had on the neurobiology of peripartum mental illness. So, but yeah, so when we talk about humans, I'm going to go over humans for this because this is, I think, what's more relevant. There's been research done by Elselina Huxema's group and Susanna Carmona's group in Europe, here in Netherlands and Spain, and they really been, and others as well, but really been looking at what happens from preconception to post-conception. So they had this lovely study a few years ago showing a number of structural changes across pregnancy in the brain, where this, in terms of this decrease in brain size occurring in many brain areas important for social behaviors and parenting. And then others have shown a slight increase in the postpartum period. And then this is size, and then a decrease later on. And then in terms of function, which is actually activity, So we see a lot of increases in activity in these different brain areas I talked about that are important for parenting when a parent is viewing a picture of a baby, as compared to viewing a picture of scenery, for example, or of a non parent viewing a picture of a baby. So these types of studies will look at how your brain changes when you have an infant view, because it could be a picture, a video, or you could hear a sound of a baby crying, for example. So we don't know how the brain changes in every, I guess, trimester of pregnancy, because often in humans, those imaging type studies are more difficult to do, for ethical reasons, sometimes depending on your institution, and what have you, having a mom in a scanner. But there is some work looking at brain activity using a different method in pregnancy, and how brain activity in terms of brain waves, how that might change, and how that might be predictive of postpartum maternal feelings of attachment with baby. So there's, I think, just to sum it up, in the human literature, what we're seeing is across pregnancy and in the postpartum period, there's changes in structure of different brain areas, and usually a shrinking, let's say, but this is actually to increase. We like to think of it as increased efficiency, so less can be more. And then in activity, which is actually how it's functioning, the brain, there's an increase in activity with baby related cues, which would make sense because, of course, we want our brain has to learn quickly and rapidly to care for baby and remember what to do to keep baby alive. That's how I look at it anyway.
And then is there any correlation in between if that is not occurring where they're seeing like postpartum mood disorders?
Yeah, so I can tell you that in that study, with the structural changes across pregnancy, they showed that as the brain had these different brain areas that were smaller in structure, there was actually a that was healthy and good and was correlated with how a mom felt about her baby. So there's something about this natural change in structure that is really important for feelings towards baby. So that's important to remember. These are all healthy changes, even though we talk about it as getting smaller, less can be more. And then in terms of if we're looking at, for example, postpartum depression, we can see that, I mean, the best example I have offhand right now is a recent study that came out of Alison Fleming's group, showing that the amygdala seems to respond quite differently in a mom that has postpartum depression than in a mom that doesn't have postpartum depression. And the response is quite high. What it is as a more functioning, it seems to be quite activated when the mom is viewing her baby, but also when the mom is viewing a picture of someone else's baby. So there are these differences that we're starting to see in the neurobiology in the human brain with mental illness in the perinatal period, that's clearly different than without mental illness. And we're also seeing that these changes can be different than what you see in the brain of people that are also, for example, depressed but not a parent.
Hmm. What have you liked the most about your work?
What have I liked the most about my work? Oh, this is a good question. I mean, one thing I really love about research is just asking questions and trying to find answers, which lead to more questions. So, there's something about the creativity, the curiosity that I find stimulating and interesting. I love the topic, of course. For me, I'm not one who does research just to do research. I really, really love the topic, and more so the past few years, I've become really quite a bit more passionate about advocating for better healthcare and more research around brain changes with parenting and perinatal mental illness. And so I think that I've also enjoyed connecting with other professionals that work in this perinatal area, doing various different aspects of work and really learning from them, but also sharing what I know. So that's been really valuable. Of course, I love working in the lab. I love working with students and doing some mentoring, and there's different aspects of the research world that I really enjoy. But I would say part of it is just the curiosity, being able to answer questions and ask more, and then really now, yeah, being able to share what we know and hopefully improve how people are looking at women's health and maternal mental health in particular.
Yeah. What's something maybe you wish you would have known, you know, before, like what you know now that you wish you would have known when you were first entering motherhood, or something that you feel like more moms need to be made aware of? Like, like here you are, you're pregnant, or you just like had your baby. Like, what would you like to hand them as far as information?
Yeah. I guess for me, I think one thing I've realized is how important it is for moms to know that their brain changes and that it's healthy. There's brain changes. It's normal. It's normal probably to have some ups and downs, to have some memory changes and what have you. Like there's a part of this is a normal experience. Of course, when it becomes extreme and difficult to handle, then that's a different thing altogether. But I think I've learned how much just knowing that the brain changes has been really helpful for individuals. And so that's probably the biggest thing. Just know that your brain does change and is changing essentially to prepare you to become a parent. I think the other thing that's really valuable for people to know is that just because you give birth and have a baby, it doesn't mean you know what you're doing. So this idea of maternal instinct, there's no switch. There's no switch that turns on and makes you know what you're doing. So it's a learning process, and I think that this is really important to remember. And our brain is there to help us learn and remember to parent, not just for the birthing parent, but also for the partner as well. I mean, yeah, I think that this is essential to understand. It's like all about making mistakes and learning from them. So,
Has there been a period of time that you've been able to see, lasting effects of our brain changes? Is it something that is only in a certain time period in the postpartum period, or is it kind of like a life changing alteration?
yeah, so there's been some recent research showing that parenting impacts your brain essentially forever as an evolving or changing process. So, how your brain might be in the first year postpartum or the first few months could be very different than what your brain will be like 10 years later or 50 years later, what have you. But what's interesting about this research that's been coming out is that just the fact that you've parented, especially the research is showing mothers in particular, that there are long term effects of parenting on the brain. And for me, I think this makes sense because you have this relationship with a child or with someone, right? So this kind of relationship that evolves over time. So of course your brain, for me, I think, of course your brain would be changing in response to that.
And you said there hasn't been as much research on the non-birthing parent, but what about people that birth a child and then are not the caregiver for that child, whether they're, putting them up for adoption or for whatever circumstances they can't be with that baby? Is there research being done on the effects of those individuals?
Yeah, I don't think we have any research in humans on that in particular. It's something I've been really interested in is, loss, essentially pregnancy loss and how that can affect the brain because as the brain's changing throughout pregnancy, what happens when baby's not there? I've done a little bit of this in some of my work in animal models, essentially looking at how it affects the brain and behavior of the rat mom when I take her babies away. Very little research I've done on this, but I've shown, in fact, what was really surprising to us was when those babies were taken away, even 2 months later, she had a real difficulty. The rats, that group in general, had a difficulty performing memory tasks and, in fact, showed depressive like behaviors. And I know there's one group that's in Germany, Oliver Bosch's group, that's doing work looking more specifically at brain changes related to loss or separation from babies, but again, in animal models. So, in terms of the human imaging work, I don't know anyone who's doing this work. I hope somebody is. And then, even in the animal models, I only know one group that's really doing this work, but there could be more. Of course, I don't know everybody, but I think
Yeah.
it's really, really interesting and important topic to talk about in more detail.
Awesome. Is there anything else that you would want to add that we haven't kind of touched on in this episode?
Anything else I would like to add? I don't know. I guess in some ways, you know, I think parenting is kind of this journey, and I've been fortunate to be able to do it with a partner. And I think we can't do it alone as moms. And this is really important. So, there's things that are important as one, your body's changing, preparing you. You don't know everything. And two, have someone there to help you. I mean, if you can, like, this is really the ideal situation because it's a difficult time, but then also it can be a really fun time having your little ones. And even now, as they're older, I'm seeing, there's lots of fun in parenting. So, so that's, I would hope that everybody has enjoyable time parenting. But obviously, if you're not and it's a struggle, which it is for many people, then reach out for support because you're not alone and you're definitely not to blame. And you can feel much better with support. There's people available for you as well.
Awesome. And then one final question. If there's anybody that's listening that either knows somebody that wants to get into this kind of field or like interested in it themselves, like what's kind of a starting point that they can go to, I guess, be on that path?
Yeah, so if you're interested in research, entering into this research area, I mean, of course, there's going through university and getting different degrees and what have you is helpful. But I mean, if you're really interested in working with someone and doing graduate work or even research with them, I would, encourage you to contact them and see if they have a space in your lab, either a paid position or even volunteering part time. I think that can be really valuable to have that experience, hands-on experience. So directly contacting people is a really great idea for that research. There's also the different conferences. I am on the advisory board for the Parental Brain meetings, which are every 3 years now. So our next one is in 2025. So Parental Brain 2025, it will be in Spain. And if you're able to come to a conference, and that's also really great to meet a number of researchers doing different aspects of research on the parental brain. So that's another great opportunity. Otherwise, I would say, if you're passionate about it, just keep seeking out, experiences, interactions with people. Contact me and I can help put you into touch with other people as well, or organizations and what have you. There's lots out there to explore. So you just have to start somewhere.
So, speaking of contacting you, how can we contact you? Where are you at on social media? And then also, you have a podcast of your own. So, give us the title of that and what you kind of touch on your podcast.
Yeah, so you can find me. I have a website, jodipawluski.com. I'm also on Twitter at Jodi Pawluski, on Insta at Dr. Jodi Pawluski. And I have a podcast called Mommy Brain Revisited, where I speak with other neuroscientists about their research. And that you can find on all major podcast providers, iTunes and Spotify. Yeah, and I also have a page on Instagram for that as well, Mommy Brain Revisited. So those are my social handles. And yeah, I'm always open to, I love hearing from everybody and open to talking more about the brain if you have any questions about what you've been going through as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I feel like this was definitely packed with a lot of information. And
Yeah.
I definitely recommend, if this is something that, listeners are interested in, like going to your podcast and listening to all those episodes too, because you really do like dive deep on individual topics. So
Yeah, thank you.
I've
Yeah.
enjoyed them.
Super, thanks. Yeah, there's a wide range of topics, and yeah, in neuroscience. So definitely do explore them. There's a number of different people I talk to, which has been also great for me to be able to share the science with everyone. And I think that's important as well. So thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. Well, this wraps up another episode of the Entering Motherhood podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review us. wherever you are listening, because that helps the show grow and expand so that other mamas can learn information on how to heal and navigate in motherhood. Thank you so much for listening. It means so much to me.
And be sure to subscribe so that you can listen to the latest episodes of the Entering Motherhood podcast.
See you later, mamas.